Great. Hey, everybody, welcome to The 7. I'm Steve Leary, and today we're looking at another big thing in Winter Park that a lot of people don't know about, and if they do, they're probably misinformed. My three guests today: Frank Hamner is a property owner, a business owner, a lawyer, and a 30-year resident of the city of Winter Park. He has the privilege of representing one of the largest landowners in the proposed overlay district that we're going to be talking about. Frank has chaired several committees for the city and is actively engaged in the community. Laura Turner, a 30-year resident of Winter Park, a professional planner for over 37 years, a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners since 1986, and since 2003, owner of Winter Park-based Laura Turner Planning. Laura works around the state and has served the city on numerous boards over the years. Stephanie Henley. Stephanie is a Winter Park property owner and principal in Winter Park-based Beasley and Henley Interior Design. She and her partner spearheaded the first revamp of Orange Avenue and the original Orange Avenue Merchants Association in 2006. Welcome, guys. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
So I'm going to do a little bit of a setup, then I'm going to ask you some questions, and you can help kind of clarify some things on Orange Avenue, I hope, for the folks. Today's topic is the Orange Avenue Overlay, a one-time brilliant urban design plan that has recently been dismantled due to intentional disinformation that was disseminated prior to the last city commission election. For decades, the city of Winter Park had been discussing the challenges of Orange Avenue. This is the section between Einstein Bagel all the way up to Fairbanks Avenue, where Fiddler's Green has been properly pouring Guinness pints for years. The city has also struggled with how best to improve the major corridors in and out of the city, specifically Lee Road, Fairbanks and Aloma, 1792, Lakemont, and Orange Avenue. So during the last state-mandated revision to the comprehensive plan, the city included corridor revitalization as a focus area. We could not address all corridors at once, so it made sense to select a single corridor and use it as a case study for the other corridors. Orange Avenue was a natural choice for a number of reasons. First, we had been studying it for years and knew many of the challenges already. We also had the three major property owners along the corridor, each considering redevelopment. Not only that, the three properties were strategically located along the corridor with one at each end and one directly in the middle. So city staff asked the city commission for permission to create a task force, a scope of work, budget, and consultant team. Each commission member was given a single appointee, and staff chose additional appointees from related citizen advisory boards like Planning and Zoning, Parks and Rec, so on and so forth. After over a year and dozens of public forums, committee meetings, community input sessions, corridor walks, consultants' presentations, and more, city staff presented the Orange Avenue Overlay Plan to the City Commission for a first reading during a marathon session on January 13th, 2020. Full disclosure, I'm a part owner of two properties along the corridor and sought an opinion from the Florida Commission of Ethics regarding my position. Given the pertinent facts, the FCE opined that I did not have a conflict and that I should be participating in the discussion and the vote. It was clear from the outset of the study that regardless of public statements, members of the City Commission and their allies had zero interest in a fair public process to allow the community, specifically the property owners and neighbors, to develop a community-first plan. Rather, the process was hijacked and there were continual attempts to derail it by the usual suspects. So let's start here, if you don't mind. Laura, you've been a planner for 37 years, as we've said, involved in projects both big and small around the state. Can you talk about the original OAO process and how that was handled?
Sure, Steve. As you mentioned, the committee was set up with representatives from 6 different city boards, as well as the mayor and the 4 commissioners each had an appointee. So they all had a hand in creating this range of different interests and perspectives. We had a very narrow focus or marching orders, and that was to look at creating place-making opportunities along the Orange Avenue corridor. So we were to focus on the land use parameters and incentives and looking at a way to provide flexibility and ways to ensure creativity as we're looking at how to re-energize this whole corridor. We also had to have a balance between individual property owners as well as positive contributions to not only the corridor, but this key gateway into Winter Park. We also needed to build on previous work from the city, not including the vision plan, as you mentioned, the comprehensive plans, aspirations, and also a previous community-wide workshop. All of these members took their duties very seriously. They did their homework. We met every other week for 6 months, which is a very rigorous review. So it was fresh on everyone's mind. At every meeting, we had the public had the opportunity to share thoughts at the end of our discussion. And that was also valuable input that the group can consider. So I could talk more about the process, but I think that gives you a good overview.
So then let me just touch on that, Laura. Just a quick follow up, and I don't want to belabor the point, but as I said, you've been doing this for 37 years. Do you think was it a good process? I mean, from all it sounds like it's, at least in my 10 years serving the city, it is easily the most inclusive process that I've ever seen. And so you're 37 years. Do you kind of concur with that?
I do. It's actually probably one of the best transparent, interactive processes I've been in. A part of my planning practice is doing community outreach, and this would be the stellar example. The other point I want to mention is that city staff was available virtually 24/7. So they were available to provide information, answer questions, in addition to all the work that went into working with the committee.
Yeah, good. Hey, Frank, I'm going to go to you next, if you don't mind. You represent one of the largest property owners, not just in Winter Park, but specifically on that corridor. In the past, the property owners had been reticent to work with the city due to the lack of trust with certain city commission members. I remember at the beginning of this process, there were some of the same doubts about the commitment from the city. And you could probably talk about that. But to Laura's kind of perspective, what was your perspective on the process this time, and perhaps why there is no trust by commercial property owners with the city commission?
Well, thanks, Steve. I mean, for years that I've been representing the Hollers, the property that was Holler Chevrolet and was for a while Orlando RV has always been kind of a focal point of any question about redevelopment for the city. And, it's always been, up until this last process, the city attempting to tell us what we should do with the property, what the city wanted us to do with the property. I can't rattle off on one hand the times that I've had contact from the city about what we should be doing with our property and plans that they had developed for it. So with a new planning director, I was initially very skeptical, more of the same, but quickly became very impressed. Bronx had a fresh idea, an inclusive idea. They went through with city staff, scrubbed the comprehensive plan, the land use plan, looked at the objectives and the requirements of those plans, and really geared the process to satisfy those requirements. I remember before even the committee was put together, 2 big public meetings, one at the chamber and one at the new community center, where everyone in the city was invited to come down and write down what they thought they needed for the future. And they compiled that and presented it back to the city commission, again, in an open, public, transparent forum. The process was, really a model for resident, property owner, business owner, and city as a whole inclusion in the process. And to see it derailed and we're back to, business as usual. Here's what we think you should do with your property. Now there's litigation. Everything's being constrained. It's to me, very insulting to the people who work so hard, and certainly very disappointing for the city. You've got 5 people trying to say, we're a lot smarter than all of you, and we're going to tell you what you need to do.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because again, and none of the city commission members are planners. They have no experience in planning, and I found it really fascinating that each commissioner has an appointee to planning and zoning, or at least one. I think the mayor gets 3 appointees, and the planning and zoning commission, after they received the first iteration of the revised ordinance for the Orange Avenue overlay, they actually had the nerve to question it and make modifications and recommendations to the city commission, which again, they're an advisory board. That's exactly what they're supposed to do. So this city commission called them on the carpet and asked for a joint meeting where they were asked, where the planning and zoning committee, their own appointees, had to defend their recommendations. And then at the end of the day, the city commission overturned all the recommendations from actually the people, the professionals, once again. So it is interesting.
And I remember that post meeting with the city commission. I remember Commissioner Cooper saying, I don't know what they're doing, and they don't know what they're doing. Words to that effect. That's not a direct quote, but just shocked that it didn't rubber stamp what they'd been sent.
Well, it's funny. Someone said to me one time, just because you can read the Bible and just because you can quote scripture and verse doesn't make you a pastor. And, I feel the same way in planning, right? You may be able to recite the comp plan chapter and verse, but it certainly doesn't make you a planner. I think Laura would definitely agree with that. Stephanie, I want to go to you next. You were involved with the first attempt by a commission to try to fix Orange Avenue years back. What was that experience like? What about the original OAO and kind of where we are today? How do you feel as a longtime property owner, somebody who's been involved there and been very impactful in there?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. The current situation is really disappointing. We've long felt that Orange Avenue has been the redheaded stepchild of Winter Park, always taking a back seat when really it's a key focal point. It's a key entry point into the city and should be celebrated as that. And brought into the fold, so to speak, and get the attention it deserves. And we were really excited with this plan from Bronce and his team. And to echo what the others have said, it really was a huge team approach. So it's very disheartening to see this happen. When we first started this, in 2006, it wasn't as ambitious. It was more about street planning and streetscaping. We had a lot we wanted to do, but we kind of toned it down so we could actually just get it done. But it went through similar. We had many meetings, huge design charrettes with the neighbors. It was massive, similar to this situation, and pulling everybody's opinions. And there are just going to be people who don't want it done. They don't want anything to change, and that's just the way that they're always going to be. With the city, though, on the first go around, it was much more. It was much more pleasant. This has really turned into something very ugly, and very unprofessional, quite honestly, because the people who have been in this process have been in it, thought it through. There are always tweaks to be made. There are always changes that can be had. But it was a really great plan. There were things that we were going to be able to do to our building, not massive. We're in the A zone. There's not a whole lot that we can do, but it would have helped us. We had to move from Orange Avenue a few years ago because we ran out of room in our building. So, that's a good problem to have. But we would have liked to have stayed. And had this plan been in effect, the original one anyway, not the current one, which I think is now pretty watered down. But from the current one, we could have made changes to our building. In the current plan, I don't think anything's really going to change for the A properties at this point.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you there. I remember running for city commissioner or when I ran for mayor. But at one time, I made the comment that, there's a group of folks in probably every area that don't want things to change and don't see the need for them to change, get a little nervous with change. And I remember reading, Steinbeck of Mice and Men. This is one of the few books I actually remember reading as a college student, where, Lenny had the pet mouse or whatever, bunny, I don't remember exactly what it was, but he pet it and he loved it so much he squeezed the life out of it. And I feel like these folks that say they love Winter Park so much, they don't recognize that our past, there weren't all these restrictions. You trusted your neighbors to do the right thing. And did certain neighbors take advantage of the situation sometimes? Sure. But if you're going to build a city or build anything on the lowest common denominator on trying to protect so much, you're going to squeeze the life out of things. Hey, Frank, I mentioned the misinformation and kind of the lack of commitment to fix the problem and create another Park Avenue and Hannibal Square. That was the goal, was to create a third neighborhood to have people walking. And I remember Commissioner Sprinkle saying when we initially took this under was, why shouldn't Orange Avenue and the folks that live and work around there have the same place that folks that live and work in and around Park Avenue and Hannibal Square have? And then we saw some misinformation going out. People talked about 7 stories up and down Orange Avenue, which we know was never going to happen. There were those on the commission and in the public and some of their allies that were kind of working against this process from the start. Can you take a stab at that a little bit? Because I think it's important to kind of set the stage to talk about that.
Well, they attacked at least the 2 large property owners with disinformation campaigns. I remember the Winter Park. I can't even remember what the little email thing is, but it was Beth Hall and I think Jennifer Anderson behind it. Sent out an email about the Holler Fortress. One of the folks from, oh Lord, I can't remember his name, one of the architects in town who came up with a demonstration of something he said could be built, which was a massive brick building with no windows. He presented that to the city commission. Commissioner Sullivan and his campaign sent out a mailer that called what the city had illustrated as a possibility just for massing as Dimitri's conceptual plan during the campaign. After this set of commissioners got in on the dais, now they've tried to sell this proposition that this whole original overlay, which was part of that process, which, by the way, was approved by planning and zoning, which had on it land use lawyers, developers, and the most important thing, fellows of the Association of Certified Planners. I mean, that is a huge deal. You need to go back and watch that video. They overwhelmingly approved the plan. And now the commission is trying to sell it as Bront Stevenson. He just shoved this down everybody's throat. I mean, it's repulsive to think that all those people who work so hard are somehow in this commission's version so stupid that Bront's just shoved all this down their throat. Commissioner Weaver, 2 days after it's approved, he's sending emails out to some of his compatriots finding a way to amend or delay the OAO. Was trying to find ways to get to the state somehow and get them to shut it down. And ultimately, based on those emails, I had to file a lawsuit to get all of his emails. He wouldn't produce them. And finally, we had to get an order from Judge Strobich forcing him to produce emails was the only way that he would do it. And so you go from this, as Laura described, wonderful, transparent, engaged process to, once they've gotten a hold of it, the things I've just illustrated. And now then you go to a bunch of workshops where you can't take any public comment. It's just, a couple of the commissioners just talking amongst themselves about what they think we should do. You go to the nights that the first vote was held. All of a sudden, I think there were somewhere between 40 and 60 amendments presented for the Orange Avenue overlay that had never been presented to the public before, and just show up at this meeting without any opportunity for the public to comment on them and vet on them. That's no accident. That's planned that way. The workshops were planned that way. The city charter said you can accept public comment at workshops. They just chose not to because now they just want to strangle this process.
Well, and I think just to make a quick comment, I don't think it was, you mentioned 2 ladies, and I don't think Jennifer Anderson was on that. I think it's Hommel. I don't remember her first name, but I think
Janet Hommel. You're right.
That was the other one, right? So it wasn't.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Another. I think it's. I got the J's messed up. Yeah. I know it was that Paul. So I actually had breakfast with her one day to try to figure out what was going on with that whole process. Not very fruitful.
Well, I'll tell you, and I'm going to read from the email you mentioned. You referenced an email, and it was between Commissioner Todd Weaver, Peter Gottfried, Marty Sullivan, who at the time was a commission candidate, and somebody named Charlie Williams. And in it, Charlie writes, certainly ready to generate a public comment email campaign to create a, quote, pause, end quote, re-review, hyphen, return to sender situation. So it was clear that there were people working to try to delay this so that if a new commission came in, they could overturn it. So again, listen, if you're going to overturn something, just overturn it. I mean, that's fine. Just go about it the right way. The commission, the city went through this thing the right way, got to where we got to. And, it's sad that it's kind of sad that this is where we ended up. I want to ask you a bit about the park, and this is certainly open to anybody. Laura, from a planning standpoint, Frank from a value standpoint, probably, and Stephanie from a neighbor standpoint. We now found out that the city-owned Progress Point, which is conservatively valued at around $6 million, I'm going to say 4 acres roughly. The city commission has authorized at least $2 million to build a park there in the middle of a commercial corridor with limited foot traffic, 45-mile-an-hour vehicle traffic surrounding it. So we're using additional, because it's a city-owned property, so we're using additional funds to build a park that we'll now have to maintain in perpetuity, that no one on the corridor wanted unless it came with redevelopment and foot traffic. And we've lowered the value of city-owned property surrounding it and made that property harder to redevelop. And the city commission at the time said, we don't mind redeveloping Progress Point, but we want the developer to take very seriously our commitment to green space and incorporate green space into the design. This commission has basically hacked off an acre or two on the front of this thing, which devalues the overall property, and now they're going to commit another $2 million to build a park. And as I said, we were all very comfortable with the park as long as it had redevelopment around it, because it was going to put foot traffic in the park. Laura, what's your perspective from a planning, I guess? How does that work, dropping a park in the middle of this thing with no committed foot traffic to it?
Well, first of all, green space and parks are always important to communities.
Agreed.
And with the original overlay district, that was one of several different options of how that property could be used. But that would be a decision made at a future point when you're going through the review process that's already in place. One of the challenges is that this corridor, and from a foot traffic perspective, you can't safely get from the adjacent neighborhoods to this corridor, which was one item that kept coming up. And you've got green space opportunities and gems within a block or two. You just go across the railroad tracks, you have Azalea Recreation Center. Just down the street from there is Mead Garden, and to the north is MLK. So you already have access to a number of green spaces.
Well, I would just throw in there too, Laura, that we could have taken that $2 million and made Mead Gardens almost completely renovated with the renovation plans they have underway. We could have taken that $2 million and cleaned up MLK Park, and we could have done that on the city dime, and then we could have turned over Progress Point to a developer and made them create some type of green space on the site on their dime, right? So, and it would have been much more inclusive into the community.
And this also was a prime opportunity to solve some of the larger community issues or corridor issues, because realize this is retrofitting an existing corridor. We're not starting from scratch, where it's a lot easier to deal with things. So
hey, can I
address parking, a parking structure to deal with stormwater issues, as well as having the proper mix of commercial or office use, whatever that built environment would be, and then also have the inviting setting of bringing people in an open space type of arrangement.
So that's a great. I was going to touch on that and probably throw that over to Stephanie at the time, because Stephanie, that would have, when people don't understand what we mean when we say you can't redevelop these smaller properties on Orange Avenue. And so I'm going to hit that, but smaller property owners and the Hollers are a large property owner. The city is a large property owner, and the Mitri company is a large property owner. And frankly, my properties are fairly large, nowhere near the size of the others, but we have water retention on site. We have adequate parking on site. So this plan really didn't help me at all as a property owner. If anything, it probably hurt me, because I have a competitive advantage on the corridor because I have parking and water retention. But some of the smaller property owners, they don't have, if they go to redevelop their property, they have to provide on-site water retention. They have to increase their parking pretty significantly. And so that's why you had to move off the corridor if you wanted to increase your property size, if you wanted to increase your building size, you would have had to handle that. And yet Progress Point could have been that site for you. They could have given you water retention. They could have given you parking. Is that what, I mean, talk to me about that space.
That's part. Yeah, I mean that's part of it. Again, with this new plan that from August, and I don't even know where that stands right now. There's so many changes with this thing. That really there's nothing even for my property anymore. And for most of the 8 properties, from what I can understand of it, again, it's like it's moving around all the time, so I'm not quite sure where it landed most recently. But there's no change for us. There's no improvement for us. And most of the businesses on Orange Avenue are just like me. They're small properties. The Progress Point, remember, Progress Point is only called that because that's what a developer named it 10 plus years ago when they were going to develop it. So that's where that name comes from. It was always going to be developed. When we were all assessed for the changes that happened, 10 odd years ago, our property tax assessment, we all took it, but we knew it was going to be temporary because it was pretty high for all of us. We knew it was going to be temporary because Progress Energy property was going to be developed, and it was never developed. Still waiting for that to be developed. We don't, Mead Gardens is right there. As Laura said, the Azalea Park is right there. Green space, great. Let's get some green space. But we have to have some type of commercial development, or maybe it's residential development. It's something to continue the people's vision, people's thing to do as they walk down the road. It's to bring people to the area and to have it a destination. From a business standpoint, there are parks all around. Everyone loves parks, but we need something that actually goes there to generate taxes, to generate parking, to generate whatever we need for retention. A park is just a bad idea. I mean, it's nice that they want to put this in there for the neighbors, again, who right down the street have Mead Gardens, but we all need something too, and we have been waiting a very long time. We were super excited when this came out, March 2020, and then bam, it's just out. Here we go again.
Well, I'm going to go to Laura in a second. I know you got a question, Laura, but I'll touch on that too. And I would tell you that park is not being done for the neighbors. I met with some folks, representatives of the Winter Park Land Trust, whose charter, I believe, said their reason for being was to raise money to purchase land and to help maintain city-owned parkland. And I met with Steve Goldman, who started the Winter Park Land Trust a year and a half ago, and he showed me a plan that he and some friends had drawn up for Progress Point. And I said, well, this is great, but we're going to go to RFP and let a developer come back with plans. That's the way the process works. And yet here we are a year and a half later, and we're actually kind of looking at the plan that he talked to me about a year and a half ago, which is carve off a piece for the front and make green space. And, if you want to contribute money to help the city to purchase land and maintain parkland, fantastic. If you're going to act more like a political action committee and get people elected who will do your bidding, that's a whole different thing. Laura, what did you want to say? I'm sorry there.
Oh, that's okay. I just wanted to add that with the opportunity at Progress Point to address quarter-wide issues, that wouldn't be out of their philanthropic, heart to do this. The district was set up with incentives. So if extra parking was provided, then perhaps some increased density, or if you provide more stormwater than what you need so that you could take care of Stephanie's property and maybe that block. There were other incentives so that it was a win-win for the owner as well as for the community. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, let me go to Frank on that. I think that's a very valid point. What we had heard from again, the naysayers and the people just honestly making stuff up to try to kill this, was, the haulers are going to get 8 stories or 7 stories or whatever it was, right? And build this massive parking garage. And what people, Frank, how would you get to the maximum density, not that you guys asked for, but actually that this task force came up with, that your property, the folks you represent would have gotten? Like, what would you could go tomorrow and build a Walmart on that site, right? Or something similar to it on the old Chevrolet property on Fairbanks. I don't think anybody in Winter Park wants that. But in order for you to get the density and the intensity of the development, what are some of those things that you would have to offer back to the community?
Well, I mean, one of the things that got demonized in this whole thing was that the publications were always like the maximum possible densities, the maximum possible densities. And as Laura and Stephanie have touched on so aptly, the whole point of this overlay was to solve a lot of those problems that they talked about. So you started with a base floor area ratio, meaning the square footage of what you could build. And then you could only go up from that floor area ratio. There weren't any variances. There weren't any like, oh, we just don't think that's right. You had to, in essence, buy or contribute your way up by providing extra parking, by providing green space, arts, entertainment district. You could make a cash contribution to certain of the important funds to the city, the Live Oak Fund, those types of things. But the whole point of this was to help solve those problems for the avenue using the Dimitri property at one end, Progress Point in the middle, and the Holler property at the other end, kind of like a set of dumbbells at the end with the park and the Progress Point in the middle to help anchor those items. And it was going to give us the opportunity to do some really wonderful, creative, and I think foundational change type stuff. But all that's been cut out of it at this point. And if you look around the city, look what gets built, right? Fast food places, banks, medical office buildings. Nothing really creative, nothing that sets a superstar type of standard, but that's what the zoning code allows. And which appears to be what this commission wants, because they're demonizing this just like they've demonized anything else that they don't like. Keep in mind, think about the Paseo for a moment. There's a waiting list that's dozens of names deep to live there. Oh, the traffic's going to increase. We're going to get the wrong demographic in here. It's going to ruin things over by the village. And it's been nothing but a catalyst, a good neighbor, and a wonderful addition to the city, and has brought in some new vibrancy and some life. The people who live there, younger professionals, people who don't want to have a single family home and all the upkeep and everything else. It's not been a bad demographic. But again, as I think Stephanie pointed out, there's a group of people that don't want to see things change in the city, and change scares them. And that's unfortunately the lowest common denominator we've brought ourselves to. By the way, keep in mind the current mayor was one of the people who made a significant proposal for, if I remember correctly, a senior living or assisted living facility and a large restaurant on Progress Point several years ago. And so it's interesting now that the perspective has changed somewhat.
Well, and I'm thankful that was, and that was something that a couple commission members were trying to move forward, and I'm glad we were able to secure enough votes not to. And no disrespect to the current mayor, that was his job at the time to try to get that done. But having a senior assisted living facility with a memory care unit in the middle of our design corridor just seems kind of incongruous, right? I mean, we want people walking from Stephanie's shop at the time to a furniture store down the road, probably hitting a little cafe for lunch, maybe sticking around for the playhouse. Folks in a memory care unit, and I'm, the person talking here is who I'm dealing with it right now with family members. They don't leave the facility. So it was just completely didn't make sense. So I'm glad that ended. So I'd like to play devil's advocate here and say here's why what happened, and the overturning was a good thing. But I'm not doing this as a joke. I don't know where we are today. I can't play devil's advocate on this one. I don't know how to do it. I would like to say nobody wanted seven stories up and down Orange Avenue. I mean, it wasn't going to happen. It continually gets compared to Maitland and the big structure Maitland, but it wasn't going to look anything like that. So if any of you can help me play devil's advocate, I'd love for you to, and I mean that. I really do. Anything anybody can add as to why what we have today is better than what was proposed originally? Yeah.
And I will say, Steve,
go ahead, Frank.
No.
I will say that
it's really disappointing.
Again, we go from a transparent, open process, right, to now just arbitrary decisions. Planning and zoning sent something to the city commission at the last meeting, and I'll just speak for my property that had a max FAR of 125%. Just arbitrarily got reduced for absolutely no reason to 100%. Just I think it should be 100%, 5-0 vote. That was pretty much it. So I personally feel like, and this is Frank speaking, not for my client or anybody else, I think it's designed to say we went through a process. Oh, look, we have an overlay now, but it's a process designed to give us an overlay that nobody will ever be able to work with. And so it just promotes the roadblock to change. Also keep in mind, there's a lot of charter amendments coming along that once they make this OAO, they want to make it harder for anybody to ever change it in the future by going to supermajorities.
Yeah, I've always found that pretty interesting that a simple majority can create a supermajority vote, right?
Right.
I mean,
that's why.
Yeah, if you're asking a simple majority of the citizens of Winter Park, or the voters, I should say, whoever shows up to vote that day, to impose a supermajority change on a piece of property, it's I don't even understand how you can straight that past the straight face content or
well. And two other points, if I may bring
Please.
them up, is to your point about 7 stories along the whole corridor. This corridor was divided into 11 sub areas, recognizing the unique character of Stephanie, of what was Designer Row, the 3 anchors that Frank talked about, and everybody in between. So you had a varied height, not just, and that is if it made it through staff site plan review,
right,
E&Z, and commission. So keep that in mind. And I forget what the other thing was, but that's okay. But that was the one point I just wanted to mention. Oh, no, the other thing is the beauty of what was originally proposed is incentive-based. And if you have incentives, then you're going to see improvements and wonderful investments in this corridor. From what I understand, the current proposal is so watered down that you're not going to have those incentives. And look, nothing's happened on that corridor because we've had no incentives. So that was my other comment.
On my property.
Yeah.
Yeah, on my property, like I said, originally we could have done some things we would have had to buy up. We couldn't do a lot even with that just because there's just no room for it. So the opportunity was there, but it was still going to be a stretch for us to do it. But at this point, there's nothing now. They just took it all away. And but even from the very beginning, for me to be able to do 7 stories, for me to be able to do 4 stories would just pretty much not ever happen. So it's just all hyperbole.
Well, and I think, I agree, Stephanie, and I'll tell you too. As part of it, we heard the entire. Well, no, and Laura, you know this too. You all know this, but the people that are watching may not. But we heard there's no traffic studies been done, and we need traffic studies. When in fact, by the end of this process, there were 4 traffic studies done. But then when the traffic studies were done, they kept changing the metrics. We had commissioners saying, "Oh, but we need this, and we need this," and certain commissioners who were fighting this the whole time said they were having their own focus groups with people to try to discuss how to make this better. Don't listen to the experts. Just have your own focus group of friends in your living room. And it got to the point where even Greg Seidel, who was a commissioner at the time, Greg was very helpful for kind of trying to help people understand why this traffic, the traffic fix here was going to actually make the traffic more local. I think it was something like 72% of the traffic on this corridor originates or ends outside of Winter Park, right? So this is people from Oviedo, and love our friends from Oviedo, and we love our friends in Orlando, but these are people using the corridor as a route to get to and from places, not to stop. This plan was going to create, again, another neighborhood like Hannibal Square and Park Avenue, and it was going to be local traffic the way this was going to be constructed and the way this is going to be fixed. Now, again, people watching this, and I didn't believe this at first either till I read the data and I listened to somebody who actually knows what they're talking about, Greg Seidel, talk about it. But this is, if you don't believe me, folks, look at the reports, look at the traffic reports. That's what they say. And these are experts. These aren't people just trying to rile people up. So there was a lot of misinformation out there. And I think we really missed the boat here. I'm going to wrap things up real quick if you guys don't mind, because I know we're getting a little bit late and I want to thank you for your time. But I just want to say, to recap this, we had a public process with over 40 meetings to get to the final product. We spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on consultants whose reports supported the original recommendation, and basically have since been thrown out. We had a plan that was lauded by professionals statewide. We had near unanimous support from the task force and complete unanimous, overwhelming unanimous support from Planning and Zoning Commission. We had property owners, businesses, nearby residents who supported the project. We had a commissioner who was involved with a commission candidate at the time and others in an attempt to delay the process, seemingly to overturn the plan after the election. We now have a plan that does nothing to create the pedestrian-friendly neighborhood and further exacerbates the traffic from neighboring communities cutting through Winter Park. We've reduced the value of city-owned property, did nothing to fix our water retention issues, our parking issues, our redevelopment opportunities, and are putting a park in the middle of a commercial corridor. A park that will add nothing to the corridor and will become a burden on future generations. This is another colossal waste of time and your taxpayer dollars on a vanity project for members of this commission. So my word of the day here, playing off of Mr. Rogers, is hypocrisy. Over the years, we've heard much from members of this commission and their supporters that we need to be open, transparent, fiscally responsible, fact-based decisions. We need to create neighborhoods. The original Orange Avenue overlay process was exactly that. Close to 40 meetings on the subject, some open to public participation. Most recently, these meetings have not been open to public participation. Property owners along the avenue have no idea what's going on, and actually the new ordinance has already gone through its first reading, and we haven't been brought in to sit down and talk about what's happening. Hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on consultants whose work is going to be disregarded. Hundreds of thousands more spent on a park that no one wants unless it was part of the overall plan. Originally, it was part of the overall plan, and we were fine with that. And this is through a process designed to get to a preordained outcome. So that's it for today, guys. I want to say thank you again. Thank you for your participation in the city. I mean, all of you lead incredibly busy lives, and your contributions, your professional contributions, not just gadflies, but actually professional contributions to the city make our place a better place to live, work, and play. So thank you, Frank, Laura, and Stephanie. You guys are great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.